Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and I've got a bin out here on the bench already. It's the cocoon nursery for my mixed batch of worms. So I've got this mixed batch of worms. It's a combination of 3 different types of worms, but I think it's mainly Indian blue worms. But there's supposedly European night crawlers and red wigglers in here too. And you can see from the old sticker that's on the bottom here, this system ran for 6 months before I finally harvested it. And usually harvesting it means moving the worms out and then grabbing the compost that they leave behind and nourishing your plants with it, or whatever the case may be. But something I've been doing lately is actually hanging on to the finished castings. And even though there's no worms in here, the cocoons that those worms that were in here, those cocoons that were left behind are, just a matter of time. They're going to start producing baby worms. And it's been working, for me for the most part. Still kind of new to the whole concept. But for a while, at least, I'll keep checking in to see if there's baby worms emerging from their cocoons. And once it seems like I've got sort of that next generation all hatched out of their cocoons, I'll round them up and reunite them with the worms that had originally laid those cocoons. So I'm just gonna check in on this thing. It's only been sitting this way for about 15 days, and likewise, the system that the worms were moved into is 15 days old today. 8 days since we last checked in on these. Here, at best, maybe a little moisture, if anything. Maybe it's fine the way it is. But in the vermibag tote where the actual worms live, I would assume that system's probably ready for feeding. So I'm going to put on a glove and we'll get to work. So if we've needed, I got my little squirt bottle here and we'll apply moisture. I don't even remember if last time we had to or if we didn't. It's sort of a kind of a contradictory way that I handle my castings. When I feel like I'm ready to evacuate the active worm bin so that I can, do whatever I want with the castings afterwards, it's during that time when I'm trying to get the worms to move out that I allow this stuff to dry considerably. And then once the worms are out and I want the cocoons left in the material to start hatching, that's when I start reintroducing the moisture, to try to make sure that those cocoons are in an environment that is friendly for them to emerge from the cocoons. It's weird, there's like a little bit of a divot, or like a little pit right here almost, as if I had fed or whatever, and then maybe something came along and ate what was in there. I don't know, I guess that was kind of the reason I had mounted everything up onto one side here too, to make it more of a solid mass as opposed to like a thin layer that can more easily lose its moisture through evaporation. But I don't know if it really helps any by doing that. I think as long as I've got that plastic covering over the top, everything should be okay. It does feel like the material in here has got a good moisture content. Here and there around the edges where the air kind of sneaks in around the plastic, it does feel like, what do we have here? Oh, and another one. So yeah, it does feel like there's a little tiny bit of drying going on here, but for the most part, the system's doing a great job hanging on to its moisture. If we were to plow through here, I wonder how many more little wormies we're going to find in here. Now, it's not all about fishing them out because I missed them last time when I was migrating the rest of the batch, because, like I said earlier, the expectation in this system is that there's cocoons, and that those cocoons, in a fairly short period of time, within a few weeks hopefully, will start hatching and resulting in more and more baby worms in here. And it's a good thing that there's like little leftover scraps of bedding and food and whatever in here too, because that'll ensure that that next generation that's yet to emerge is equipped with what it needs to get by as far as nourishment and stuff. It's mostly castings, but it definitely has a good amount of residual scraps of bedding and probably bits of food remaining in it. That's part of the reason I don't worry so much about trying to make my castings go to that 100% all castings stage. Because to me, all these little leftover bits and pieces of things are sort of there for a good reason and are needed. and then in time it'll be gone, or I could sift it out. It's not a big deal. It's just easier not to make a big fuss about it. So I don't really feel like I want to add moisture. It does feel like it's got a good dampness level to it. It's nice and cool and moist. We've just sort of tilled it up a bit and introduced some of the stuff that's been sitting here dry for the past 8 days since we last checked in. Mix that stuff in with some more damp surrounding materials. Let it get a little bit rehydrated in the process. And we'll just let it continue as is until the next time we check in. So this whole thing of mounting it up on the side, it's kind of a weird thing, but I figured what the heck. Something drove me to do it, so we'll just stick with it for now. And then the star of the show is this plastic that's doing a really nice job keeping the moisture in, even along these edges where there was maybe a lack of covering. The material did seem to be in pretty decent shape, and that kind of gave me an idea to maybe come up with a slightly better use for this paper to sort of complement what the plastic's trying to do. The plastic's keeping the moisture in for sure, but that paper now is just blocking the moisture a little as well. So these two together I think will help better ensure that the moisture that's present within the system stays within the system, or for the most part does. Alright, cool. So we're going to get the other bin out here and get those little guys fed. Alright, so now here within the VermiBag tote, I think we should be in a position where the camera sees the entire contents of the bag. The bag sits in a bus box that's a little bit larger than the box that we just checked in on. This one's got a greater width. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same size. Let's see if we could just kind of roll this fabric top back and adjust the camera slightly, make sure we're not missing anything. But yeah, I think we've got pretty good coverage here of what's happening in this system. Here too, I was trying something a little different. Usually I have one piece of plastic that covers the entire system. Here I had two little scraps of bubble wrap that seemed like they would together give me the coverage that I want. And I guess the other thing that seemed like a good idea about it was how the gap in between the two would allow for a little extra airflow. So it's funny, these are like little souvenirs from when we migrated the worms out of their castings. Because I'll usually set up my migration area that I'm trying to lure the worms over into on one edge of the bin, and then separate that section of the bin using these little dividers that I punch full of holes. And these things are really in very good shape still. And I think they'd be further along if they were submerged below the surface, where they'd get a little bit more moisture. Here they managed to get just enough air that they're maybe not remaining as damp as they could to appeal to the worms. For whatever reason, I just like to have things covering the top surface. Gives the worms little things to burrow down into. Here, pretty good dryness happening around the edges where there was no coverings. And I almost kind of envisioned it that way, that there might be kind of dry stuff right next to fairly damp stuff, and then see how that goes. Obviously, they're going to want to gravitate towards the more damp stuff. And the dry stuff will probably get a little bit neglected. So it's probably not the most optimal approach as far as maximizing the material being in a condition that the worms can do something with it. If you got stuff that's super dry, it's really not going to go anywhere. So that really just makes me question whether I want to continue with these little coverings or maybe upgrade to something a little bit bigger. All this dry paper's going nowhere fast, right? And I'm going to see if I can collect up some of these drier bits that I encountered along the way and sort of jam them down in underneath the more moist stuff here. There's a lot of large chunk things in here. What is this? Why is this so big? Usually something this big is multiple things sort of jamming together and getting stuck to one another. I'm not a big fan of that happening. That is, unless the worms are, you know, really digging it and they're crawling through it and they're occupying it, but usually it means quite the opposite, that the worms can't even get into this stuff because it's just a big hunk of stuff, you know. That's almost impenetrable. Penetrable, I think I've used that word in the past. I'm not even sure if it's a real word. Alright, so yeah, I think moisture is definitely going to become a topic here. I don't think it's an issue. I think it's just a topic because it's certainly not dreadful. The somewhat dry stuff out here on the very edge can easily just get repositioned lower underneath some damp material. We're going to bring in some additional dampness with the food we give them today. The stuff I'm giving is frozen, and as it thaws, it's going to emit moisture. And that, combined with a slightly better covering to keep the moisture in the system rather than letting it dry, I think would probably get us going more in the right direction. I like to try to apply little subtle changes to things rather than, you know, going crazy and dumping a gallon of water in here. You know, just kind of gradually get to a better state versus trying to force it there. A little bit less shock to the system, I guess, maybe. Here too, kind of large chunks of leftover bedding here, and I think I'm already seeing some remnants of the last feeding, which was pumpkin. The stuff sticks out so clearly in the worm bin. It's just got this vivid orange color. And there is a good bit of it here, or at least so it appears. Here's another piece of plastic. I found a similar piece of plastic the other day, and I don't know what it is. I'm going to put it aside and keep it with the other one that I found. I'm trying to figure out what the heck it is. Very weird. Usually I would spot something like that. It almost makes me wonder if it was somehow embedded into the food that I fed the worms. Who knows? Alright, let's check out where the feeding was last applied a little bit more closely. It's probably where we're going to find a greater number of worms. We didn't really see many worms in the other areas, probably because of the dryness over there. Yeah, so as soon as we get down right below where the pumpkin was, right where all of its juices had flowed down after it thawed out, it appears to be the spot where all the worms are huddled together, enjoying the dampness, enjoying the food. It almost seems like, I don't know, let me see. The stuff is just such mush already. I'm surprised that it's still here. But yeah, I mean, compared to the chunks that it was when I put them in here, these were large chunks of pumpkin. So considering that this is all the leftovers, it's a pretty good job they did of it, I believe. Okay. It's so funny, I'm not sure if it comes through on the microphone of the camera, but since I've got a family living upstairs on the second floor of the house, we all share the same ductwork and the same heating system. And sometimes the conversation coming out of the upstairs is so clear, and not from the perspective of me being able to understand what they're saying, because I can never understand what they're saying, but I can certainly hear the individual voices and the tone and the attitude, or the, you know, cheerfulness, or maybe not so cheerfulness. So it's almost like you're kind of eavesdropping, but there's certainly no detail. I can't tell what is being said, but I can definitely hear there's somebody there talking. All right. I'm bringing in my big collection of pre-made bedding, and we're going to go generous. This is going to be kind of a combination of me reaching down deep into the container where there's some more aged stuff, the stuff where the colors have run together a lot more, and then the stuff here on the surface, on the top, is mainly just cardboard and paper. There's no leaves mixed into that this newer stuff on top, but the stuff in the bottom was originally made with a combination of leaves thrown in here too. I'm just gonna have to get out there and replenish my supply of leaves at some point because I ran out a couple days ago down here. So no systems have been getting leaves, and I haven't been including leaves in the creation of my bedding either. Ooh, I can see a little puddle on the bottom. Might have to shred some more paper to throw in there to suck up that moisture. But I'll take some really damp stuff off the bottom there to place it right in here to compensate for some of that dry stuff that we encountered earlier. On top of which will come the food, and it's kind of cool. I just pulled this right out of the coffee machine, and it's nice and warm because the coffee machine just finished brewing this coffee. So it's totally fresh stuff. And I guess to compensate for the warm stuff, this stuff is straight out of the freezer. It's apple cores and apple peels. Also relatively fresh, has been freezing all night, but it was a contribution from my mom as of yesterday, if I recall correctly. So what I'll usually try to do with this coffee is combine it with the surrounding materials, so having all this fresh bedding right below it is perfect. I can blend it right into that stuff. And then we can start piling in this frozen stuff. Here again, my conscience is pretty clear because I'm putting the frozen stuff on top of fresh bedding and not on top of unsuspecting wormies. Or at least I hope. So this has been in the freezer all night. Once this stuff starts to thaw out, I would have to assume it's going to kick out a good amount of moisture. Here are the cores of these apples. That looks like a pretty nice, generous feeding. Let's include a little bit of my crushed eggshell as the grit to go along with this feeding. I'm going to have to replenish my supply. I seem to be running a little bit low. Then we can combine the remaining coffee with this stuff. It's kind of cool. I'm not sure if the camera's picking it up, but the stuff is steaming because it's still so warm from being in the coffee machine. It's probably got a lot to do with the fact that it's right next to a bunch of frozen stuff too. So my thoughts on these items here, I was wondering if I might just be able to use this stuff to sort of compensate a little bit for the moisture issue we observed earlier in terms of keeping more moisture in the system. I thought that maybe if I were to move those plastic pieces out further, I would obviously create a greater void in the middle, but then maybe these can sit in the middle to help also prevent evaporation, and maybe that way we could sort of solve our apparent moisture. Not an issue, it's just sort of, it does seem to be a vulnerability in a way, like it does have the potential to lose moisture that way, and if we can prevent that from happening, then we've, you know, saved some effort on trying to fix the matter later. So a little ounce of prevention sort of thinking, I guess. So I'm just going to get this leveled off, and then we'll see if we can apply this covering technique that I kind of brainstormed here. So we took the old coffee filter that had been covering and marking the last feeding area, and we've now included it in the feeding as part of the bedding to go hand in hand with that feeding. And we'll just use this new one that I just bought down from the kitchen as our replacement for that. So now we're pretty well covered, I believe. I guess this feeding zone indicator as well at this point also provides a little bit of protection from moisture exiting the bin. So this is what I thought, was we just take these two pieces. The two together should probably be enough to reach from edge to edge across the whole container. And then these two pieces of plastic can sort of do a better job protecting this outer edge over here, maybe. And then maybe this will actually help us a little bit, where the only stuff that's got direct access to the airflow of the overhead air is on the sides. Oh, and then let's not forget that we've also got this additional little bit of protection in here. So I think this might be just enough to help us get the moisture level in here slightly more favorable to promote worm traffic and more of the bin, as opposed to just where the foods have been getting placed. Alright, so, alright, I think that's pretty much all I've got left to do here, other than getting things covered up and cleaned up and put away, but I'm not going to waste your time with that, because that's boring. Before I go, though, let me really quickly say thank you. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. As always, if you did, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up. That's always really appreciated, and if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. Alright everyone, thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.